The crew who helped make The Look of Silence remain anonymous to protect their safety. There is a grave political risk for anybody involved with the crew in Indonesia if their identity becomes known to the authorities, especially to the military and to the paramilitary group that plays such a prominent role in my previous film, The Act of Killing. The filmmaking process also, as you see in the film, exposes Adi Rukun, who is a man of extraordinary dignity and courage, sitting by my side. It exposed him to real risk, and to mitigate that risk, Adi's family has had to move to another part of Indonesia, thousands of kilometers away. We've worked very closely with the family to try and make that an opportunity for the family by taking them out of the isolation of Medan and out of the isolation of being surrounded by the perpetrators who remain in power, the man who did this to Adi's brother, and to get the children into better schools and to create an opportunity from this. But it's a matter of making the best of a terrible situation. And of course, it is a sign, both that the anonymous credits and the fact that Adi's family had to move, that so much has not yet changed in Indonesia, and it's exactly that we hope the film will help to change. In terms of the process of shooting this film, of course, the old footage that you see in the movie, which Adi is studying so intently, that was shot from 2003 to 2005, before I met Anwar Congo, the main character in The Act of Killing, when I was filming every perpetrator I could find across North Sumatra on behalf of the survivors and in collaboration with the human rights community there. The core of this film, however, was shot in 2012 after we finished editing The Act of Killing, but before it premiered, understanding that once the film premiered, then I would no longer be able to safely return. I think, though, for me, that I really wanted to immerse you as viewers in the haunted silence in which survivors must build a life, surrounded by the still powerful perpetrators. So often in human rights documentary, we're encouraged to look at atrocity, but also remain optimistic that there's a campaign for justice, or there's a heroic human rights campaigner who promises somehow, at least in the future, to resolve things, letting us somehow as viewers off the hook, so that at the end of the film we're able to turn away and think about something else. And I wanted to somehow create a pause in memorial for all the lives that can never be brought back, everything broken that can never be put whole again, the decades of Rohani and Rukun, Adi's parents' life, that will never be able to be redeemed because they've been destroyed by fear. I wanted you to pause, experience that, and listen and look very, very closely to the silence that follows atrocity, particularly when there is no justice. I met Adi over a decade ago because Adi's brother, Ramli, his death, his murder, was synonymous in that plantation village with virtually the entire genocide, because Ramli's murder had witnesses. People saw it. It was undeniable. You have this situation where survivors are living and the military is threatening them not to talk about, not even to remember, the source of so much trauma and fear. And Ramli was proof, because his death had witnesses. It was proof that this had happened. So to speak of Ramli for the survivors in that region, I think, was almost to pinch yourself to remind you that you're awake, to assert your sanity in the imposed insanity of being traumatized but not allowed to talk about or even remember or acknowledge the source of that trauma. So when I started this work with survivors, trying to make a film about what it's like for them to live alongside still powerful perpetrators, everyone was talking about Ramli's murder, and I was quickly introduced to Ramli's family. And Adi, it turned out, was born after the killings and didn't have the same fear because he'd never experienced the same trauma that his family had experienced. And when Adi and other survivors encouraged me to film with the perpetrators, particularly after the army threatened them no longer to participate in the film, he would watch the footage I would bring back and sort of finally understand why his family was so afraid, finally understand by seeing the boasting of the perpetrators why his family was so fearful, and would say, this you have to continue. I think it was as though that footage made sense to Adi of what the problem was. I think that performance there's two senses of the word performance. There's people performing and acting, but there's also the sense of how something performs, what it does in the world. And it's both films, The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence, I think are films about cinema and about cinema as intervention. In fact, all nonfiction film, if you define it very simply as people playing themselves, all nonfiction film is an intervention of the people who are called upon to play themselves, and it's an intervention into their lives. And both of these films together are an intervention into the performance of national myths and stories. In The Act of Killing, as a lie, a personal and political lie, crumbles for Anwar, a national lie crumbles in the eyes of Indonesian viewers watching the film. When Indonesian viewers, through The Act of Killing, are forced finally to confront the meaning of what happened and the moral vacuum that becomes inevitable when an entire normality, when a whole society is built on the basis of terror and lies, in that moment, of course, the lie collapses. In that moment, a space opens up for people to talk about the problems that are created by living on the basis of a lie. And it is into that space that The Look of Silence comes and intervenes and performs its work. I think here we're talking about a film where finally people are, in part thanks to the act of killing, but in thanks to so many other things too, but in part thanks to the act of killing, people are able to talk about what happened. Now comes a film which shows undeniably for everybody in Indonesia, including the children of perpetrators, how correct the daughter of that perpetrator is in the film to respond with humanity and dignity and to do the thing that Adi was looking for across Indonesia, to apologize. She provides a model for everybody on all sides and everywhere in the political spectrum in Indonesia, whichever side they fall on. She provides a model for what needs to happen going forward. Now, the film doesn't end with that scene because there's a lot more work that needs to happen. In fact, it ends with a total mess in the scene with the widow and her two sons. But that scene shows what needs to happen on a national level. But what the rest of the film shows is that you cannot have reconciliation as a one-man project. You can't have a one-person truth and reconciliation committee, as inspiring as that might be as a model for everybody else. You need to have it has to be a political process. You have truth and reconciliation in South Africa because the apartheid regime fell. You had the Nuremberg trials because the Nazis lost. But when the perpetrators are still in power, before you can have genuine truth, reconciliation, justice, and healing, you need social change. The government of Indonesia is not particularly aware of this film, hasn't been at least until today, when now the government and the public and the press in Indonesia are eager to see it because of the first screenings we've had here. The Act of Killing, of course, has been screened thousands of times in Indonesia, initially in secret, then publicly. It's been put online in its Indonesian language version without subtitles on YouTube and for free download across Indonesia. It's been seen and downloaded millions of times. The film has helped open this space for a national discussion of the genocide and its terrible present-day legacy. But the film has not. The government did everything they could to ignore the film, until finally they felt they could no longer do so when the film was nominated for an Academy Award. When The Act of Killing was nominated for an Academy Award, at that point, the government of Indonesia issued a statement saying, "We know what happened in 1965 was wrong, but we will have justice, truth. We will have truth and reconciliation and justice in our own time. We know it was a crime against humanity, but we will deal with it in our own time." It was a reluctant admission that what happened was wrong. That I cannot overstate how important that is, because until that time, the government had maintained that the genocide was something to be celebrated as patriotic and heroic. So it was a huge change, even if it was a reluctant one. Every scene that had any real emotional pain or power, we felt that it should be shown. In fact, there's places where I think if there's a respect that and a care that sort of a thin line, a sort of tightrope that the film walks, it's down to Adi's own decency, dignity, gentleness, patience, and empathy. I think in the final confrontation in the film, actually, we were confronting a family that I'd actually spent quite many months documenting the husband's role the dead husband's role in the massacres with the whole family. And so it had never occurred to me that family might deny everything, that they might pretend they knew nothing about it in front of me. And Adi, we went to do that scene only because, knowing that they should admit what had happened, that Adi would be able to say to them, look, we're from the same village. To the mother, to the widow, you were in fact an elementary school teacher in my elementary school. How do we live together? We know what happened here, you know what happened, Josh knows what happened, I know what happened. How do we build a life together going forward? That was the intention of that scene. But the family decides to deny everything. And in that moment, you can see where I go farther than Adi. I push the family because I'm profoundly shocked that they lie in that way and disappointed and angry. I make them watch yet another clip. When Adi is ready to let it go and say, I have nothing more to say, I decided to leave that in, and it's a very peculiar thing in a documentary or in any film that late in the film to have this divergence between the perspective of the storyteller, me as the filmmaker, and the perspective of the protagonist. To have us diverge in that way at the end of the film is a dangerous, difficult thing, and it creates a mess. But we felt strongly that mess perfectly and powerfully expressed the mess that is inevitable and lurking just below the surface, the haunting mess of what happens when you have 1 million people killed, the perpetrators still in power, celebrating what they've done, and all of the survivors living in fear. We felt we must show that. It's a moment where maybe I cross a line that Adi would not have. But throughout the film, if we stay on one side of a line, it's because of Adi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your feedback. It means a great deal to us. The film, we finished it just a few days ago, so it really means a lot. I would say that when you say that there's only people who are sane and insane, I think that what we see in the movie, what I see in the perpetrators is fear. When I see them unable to take Adi's gentle invitation to acknowledge that what they did was wrong, I see two types of fear. I see a fear that if they acknowledge that it was wrong, they could open the floodgates to some demands for justice and give up some of their power. And I see another fear, which we see very intently, I think, in Anwar Congo in The Act of Killing as well. We see a fear about how will they live with themselves if they acknowledge what they did was wrong. In that sense, I was not a witness to the killings when they happened. Thank heavens. I would never want to film that. I would never want to be there. Thank heavens I didn't see that. So I cannot speak to the insanity that was occurring at the time of the killing, but I think we witness insanity in these confrontations, but it is a very human, it's very easily understood in terms of fear, and it is a political and collective insanity. It is not a personal insanity. We are not seeing a distinction between decent people like Adi and psychopaths like the perpetrators who drank blood. We are seeing simply the manifestation of a terrible misorganization of our societies and how we value each other's lives and how we think about each other. We are looking at collective insanity, and that is what we are trying to address through the movie and try to fight through the movie.